Welcome to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where our goal is to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. Today, we're going to be talking about how to overcome grumbling, complaining, and negativity. Think that's impossible? Our guest today, Tricia Goyer, is going to share about how she and her family pursued the grumble-free year. The scripture verse that I have chosen that encapsulates this episode best, I think, is Psalm 106:25. But grumbled in their tents, they did not listen to the voice of the Lord. Ouch. Today, I want us to have a candid conversation about how grumbling and complaining is unhealthy for us, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, as we talk with Tricia. Tricia is author of more than 70 books. She writes both fiction and nonfiction related to family and parenting. This USA Today best-selling author has also won 2 Carol Awards and a Retailer's Best Award. But maybe even more impressive, she's a homeschooling mom of 10, including 7 by adoption. Tricia is also a grandmother of 4 and wife to John. With a busy life, she understands the importance of making every word count. Welcome to the program, Tricia.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great being here.
I'm so excited that you've joined our program today because I think I spend the majority of my professional life teaching people how important our words are. So let's
Yes.
get into that. So often our passion comes from our own hurts and trials. Where did your passion to pursue grumble, complaining, and negativity-free living come from?
Yeah, well, it came from living with all these kids in the house. John and I had 3 biological kids, and when 2 were out of the house and we had a teenager, we started adopting. And so we adopted first a newborn from a private adoption, and then 2 different sibling groups from foster care. So we got a sibling group of a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and then a sibling group a couple of years later of 4 teenage girls. And, adoption's hard enough, and then you have the trauma of the past, and we got through a lot of stuff. There was a lot of anger, a lot of outbursts, a lot of just dealing with the traumatic past, and we kind of got through kind of the hard stuff, but there was that underlying grumbling that was just in our house. We talked about chores, and there'd be grumbling, or we need to turn off the TV now. And it's hard enough when you have 1 or 2 kids, but when we had at the time 9 kids or 8 kids in the house, and then my husband and I, and then my grandma lives with us too. So it was just a lot of grumbling and complaining. So my husband and I were really talking about what we wanted to do, and maybe some incentive for our kids, and we knew it'd take longer than a week or a month to get through the grumbling. So we talked about a year, and we were actually on a road trip from Little Rock, Arkansas, where we live, and I was speaking in Seattle. So we're kind of doing this family trip. We stopped by Mount Rushmore. We can come on, by the Grand Canyon on the way home. But halfway, or when we got up there, which is halfway through our trip, there was so much grumbling from the car ride. We're like, we need to start now. Like, we need to figure out what we're going to do. And so we just said, what do you think about trying to have a grumble-free year? And because some kids were like, no way. And some kids are like, yes, please. And basically we said, we don't expect anyone to get it perfect, but we're just going to work on memorizing scripture, communication styles, working on these things, because, like anything else, kids need to be taught how to communicate well, how to turn to God for help instead of just complaining. And I needed help because I found myself grumbling a lot just with all the added kids and noise and mess. So we just really needed it. And that's where it all came from.
Oh my goodness. I admire you. Road trips are hard enough with 2 children. So we often forget how seriously God takes grumbling. Mm-hmm. How did you teach your children about this?
Yeah, well, right away, we learned the scripture, do everything without grumbling and complaining. And so that was like, and that's Philippians 2:14. That was right from the beginning. We're jumping in here, and we talked about grumbling styles and how each of us do it differently. But basically, we're saying, God, you're not doing enough for us. Our
Mhm.
lives aren't good enough, or there's so much going on. And so we jumped right into learning about Moses and the Israelites, because there was a whole lot of grumbling going on there. And so we read about, here these people were slaves. God freed them. We know the parting of the Red Sea, all the miraculous things. And then we actually read through Exodus, and even in the Numbers, where it talks about just the complaining and grumbling. And in Numbers 14 it says, because of your grumbling you will not enter my rest, you will not go into the promised land. And it's like, after all God had done for them, it was their grumbling, it was their words. And he's like, you say you're going to die in the desert, that's what's going to happen to you. So their own words made them die in the desert instead of walking into the promised land. So sometimes we think it's like, well, it's just complaining, I'm not like doing these big sins, but to God it is very offensive. And so we read through, every morning we would read another chapter, and they were like, I am so tired of these people complaining. And we're like, yeah. And that's what God sees when he sees us, is he's so, I can picture like, look what I've done for you, and then all you're going to do is grumble and complain. So right away, just seeing that, it really made us realize, like, this is a serious thing.
Yeah. Oh, big time. Let's talk for a moment about how has digging up the root of grumbling impacted you?
Yeah. And that really is where I had to start, because, of course, I'm like, these kids need to get under control. And then the more I'm like, okay, I need to get under control. And I mentioned the grumbling styles. Like, we sat down, and some kids like, I whine, and some's like, I roll my eyes, which we like, it's physical things too. It's not just the words, because you're thinking the grumbles. And they're like, Mom, you gripe. And I'm like, yeah, because you need to do your chore, you need your shoes, muddy shoes. And so it's me all day just getting on my kids. And I realized that when I was growing up, a lot of my grumbling wasn't the outward yelling. It's more like, I wish someone would help me, or why doesn't someone pick up their shoes? Or that was kind of the mode of grumbling I learned. And so that was me all day. So it was really me realizing, like, I need to stop. Like, if I want my kids to do this, I need to model it. And so every time I would get on those little tirades, I'd have to go back and apologize, which is like, so humbling to go to your 10-year-old, like, I'm so sorry, I was grumbling at you. But really, it has to be our own hearts and us doing it. And I realized that I was doing it, and it was kind of like coloring my day. Like, if I'm just grumbling and complaining all day, I'm not being thankful. So, there'll be times like I'm doing piles of laundry, like, God, thank you for these kids that you brought into our lives. Thank you that we have clothes to wear. Thank you that you provided for us. And so in those moments, I really had to learn how to stop those grumbles and then turn it around and find something to thank God for. And I think it's helped us. I mean, it helped us during that year. It's helping us now with all the changes going on. It's like, we have so much to be thankful for. We don't need to focus on the negative stuff, because God is still taking care of us and providing for us, even if there's a lot of change in our lives.
So, what I hear you saying is that gratitude helps defeat grumbling.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think that is the flip side of it. You could even either have those thoughts that are negative, that are going to pull you down, kind of get you in the rut. Your thoughts get stuck. I have a life coach, Alice, and she talked about like it's a muddy track that you keep going round and around. And the more you go, the deeper you get in this muddy track, and it's hard to get out of it. So as soon as you start like going around that track, just stop and get out of it. Start being grateful, start thanking God for what he's doing, and then even thanking other people. I realized, like, one of my kids, she had a really hard time with grumbling every time I asked her to do chores. And so I was thinking about it and praying about it. And every time she went to do her chore, here I am coming in, you missed this, you need to wipe down the sink, you didn't do this. So I'm like pointing out all the things she did wrong. And so I just like, what if I just catch her doing it right and praise her? And so she was in there wiping. I'm like, you were doing a great job wiping down that counter. Like, there's still dishes, there's still like all this stuff. And she's like, oh. And then she starts wiping more. And then she starts really scrubbing the dishes and moving the canisters. And that little bit of praise just encouraged her to do a better job. And so I kept going through as I'm putting away laundry and stuff. Wow, look at this kitchen. I could really see you're maturing in your chores. And that encouragement was showing my gratitude to her. So it's not even of course we want to be grateful to God, but showing our gratitude to other people, the grumbling like diminished greatly when I started praising her and thanking her for what she was doing instead of just pointing out what she was doing wrong.
Okay, you have just challenged me, because I figured out last night after dinner as my team, and there is that tendency, because we want them to grow into responsible adults as
Yes.
parents, there is that tendency to point out constant areas in need of improvement.
Yeah.
But you're right, because I know when someone praises me or thanks me, I feel so much more motivated to keep performing, to
Yeah,
keep doing,
exactly.
to keep pleasing.
Hmm.
Okay, you've just challenged me. And the neuropsychologist, I love it. I love it. None of us have it all together.
Yeah. And even that child that was the biggest grumbler is now does the best job on the kitchen chore. And she'll take an hour and the kitchen is really clean. And I'll just say, I'm so glad, like when she gets up that morning, because we have a rotating schedule, I'm like, I'm so glad that I saw that you were doing the kitchen today. I know it'll really get clean. And so she's kind of like taken that on, and she was the one that complained the most, that did not do a great job. And now she's taken that on where she's going to spend an hour in there and the kitchen is going to be really clean when she's done. And it started with me just saying, wow, look at that little piece of counter that is really shining at that moment. And now, I could see with other kids, I'm like, okay, I need to remember to do that about different other areas.
Okay, this is a really risky question and not one that I plan to ask, but
Okay.
because you have modeled it for your children,
Mhm.
gratitude and praise, do your kids ever turn around and do that for you?
Yeah, actually, they are doing it a lot more now. And I think because I take time to like say, I thank you for this, or I appreciate this, especially like if I made a dinner, they're like, Mom, that was really good. Thank you for it. Because I have been doing that throughout the day. Or they'll be excited if I go out and play catch with them. Thanks for playing catch with me. Now my little guy doesn't have the neighbors that he's playing with as much. So I'm trying to do that more. And they are definitely showing more gratitude, but it came from me throughout the day,
Yep.
thanking them and just appreciating them.
So we as parents can influence our children for the positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
When you were grumbling, that's what they learned. And
Yes,
when you were praising and showing gratitude, that's what they learned.
absolutely.
Oh, so good. So good. Friends, we're going to take a real quick 1-minute commercial break, but stick with us because Tricia's going to share more about transitioning from a life of grumbling to a life of gratitude. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where today we're talking with my friend Tricia Goyer, and she's got an incredible story of moving from a life of grumbling with a very full household to one of gratitude. Tricia, you say that the root of grumbling is unrealistic expectations. And when I read that, it was like a light bulb went off, but of course, I had not thought of that, but it's not rocket science, but that was such a crucial nugget. What types of things do parents expect from their children that maybe we shouldn't?
Yeah, and I think there's so many things that we expect, to keep the house clean, to be able to sit down and do their homework without being tired or bored or not wanting to do it. I mean, we expect them, sometimes we expect them to work like they're adults. Like, I'm just gonna, I sit down, I get my work done, I know if I get it done quickly, I can move on, which they don't have the same even brain development that can do that and focus and all those things. But also, even their responses, I realized that I was expecting them to respond a certain way, but I had never taught them how to respond. For example, I would say, okay, it's time to turn off the TV. Well, they'd be grumbling. I didn't teach them how to respond to me when we have this conversation. Or one of my daughters, she was, I think, 10 at the time. She's an outside girl. She wants to be outside every moment of the day. She's never watching TV. I mean, she's just outside in the cul-de-sac, riding her bike, doing stuff. And So she would get into arguments with me, like, I want to play, and I'm like, it's time for dinner, but I'm not hungry, so it's these arguments. So I realized I never taught her how to respond. And so I said, today we're going to practice when you're outside and I call you in, what you're going to do. And I said, okay, go out there. And when I call you, say, yes, mom, I'm coming. And so we're going to practice that. And so she was out there and I'm like, okay, pretend like you're playing with your friends. And I said, and then I'd say, Sissy, come in. I use nicknames for them in the book, but Sissy, come in. And she's like, would pause and yes, mom, and run in. So we did this like 3 times. Well, then the next day, and I said, great job. That's a great way to do it. When she was outside playing, when she's totally involved with her friends, I'm like, it's time to come in. We're having dinner. I could see her pause and think about it. Yes, mom. And then she said bye to her friends and ran in. So I had worked with her and trained her on how to respond, or sometimes even it's a TV show. And I said, if it's over in 5 minutes, you say, mom, may I finish the show? It's over in 5 minutes. That's reasonable. So they have a way to not they don't have to immediately turn off the show at this second when I'm saying it's time for dinner, that we could have a conversation about it if you're being respectful and you're explaining something. I still might say no. I still might say pause it and we'll catch that later. But most of the time, if it's 5 minutes, we can wait 5 minutes to eat dinner. And so just having that conversation of how you respond, how we talk to each other. We train our kids on so many things, but often we don't train them how to communicate.
But pausing for 5 minutes for 10 kids could end up being close to an hour. So there has to be limits at some
not
time.
Each individual 5 minutes for kids, but if they're all in there, like watching a show or doing something, and I could say, yes, you can finish that, or, we'll get to it. Yeah. But definitely with all the kids, you can't do that. And again, sometimes it's like, no, we actually need to get in the car because someone has an appointment. Like you will pick up that board game when we get back or whatever it is. There are times that you do have that leeway, and there's times where like, no, you actually have to stop now. And just understand, and for them to be able to understand that, like, I'm not going to tell you just to turn off the TV just to use my power or just, control you. We can have a conversation about this.
But that's so reasonable, because as adults, whether we're in the work world or we're in the home and someone needs us, we can't always stop what we're doing right that second.
Exactly.
And so if we acknowledge them, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
We have to acknowledge someone's talking to me.
Yes.
And let them know, I just need 3 minutes and I can be there. That's extending respect and courtesy to our kids and teaching them how to extend it to us too.
Yes.
Love it. Okay. But I'm just thinking about this 1-year experiment. And you had a lot of kids in the household. I don't have as many in the household. But nobody gets it right all the time. So I want to talk about your perspective on how do humility and seeking forgiveness help?
Yeah. And because we don't get it right all the time, and we even said that, like, I don't expect you to get it right every day. Like, I'm going to mess up, you're going to mess up. Before we even get to the humility part and forgiveness part, we also made sure we didn't police each other, because if everyone was just pointing out everyone else's grumbling, then it would just be a big mess. And so really we had to say, this is something I want you to be able to catch yourself. And so once we figured out our grumbling styles, some were muttering under their breath or whatever, they'd start to do it and they'd catch themselves. And then I'd say, great job, you caught yourself. And so that has to go before even the humility. But it started with me humbling myself and said, I really had a bad attitude this morning. Will you forgive me? And there's often, because we homeschool, so they're all around the table. Even if I was just apologizing to one child, I would do it in front of everybody around the table, so that they would see, like, okay, this is mom coming before me. And there's times like I didn't even almost argue with God, like, I don't want to sit down and apologize to the kids today. They should have been acting better, but I had to apologize for my part in it. And I would even say that, like, I was really grumbling. Now, you guys were not acting how you should, but I could have responded better. So it was still calling them, making them accountable for what they were doing, but also being accountable for myself. And then say, will you forgive me for my attitude this morning? And I never had a time when they said no. Like, every single time, even if there'd been some conflict with a child that morning, once you say, will you forgive me, it's like it softens your heart to each other again and is able to build that relationship. And so then they would come to me. I mean, it was probably a couple weeks later when a child would come to me, I'm sorry, I was grumbling, would you forgive me? And it's like, oh, I mean, it was just so exciting to see that they were doing it, but really just came from modeling and talked about, we need to make that relationship right again. And it ended up just having the ripple effect among the kids.
I think forgiveness is such a crucial aspect
Mm-hmm.
of this. I've spent a lot of time trying to teach my children, but also my patients, that when we will go to someone when we mess up and we ask their forgiveness, it takes the fuel and the fire out of the other person's argument, especially if we will go right away, not waiting for them to come and tell us what we've done wrong. And now, when my kids realize, probably shouldn't have done that, and they will apologize before I even bring it up, forgiven. Thank you
Right.
for recognizing that. End of story. Whereas before, I would harp on it, harp on it, and harp on it.
Mm-hmm.
When you recognize it and you ask someone's forgiveness, man, it just kind of takes the thunder out of it, and life is so much more peaceful.
Yes.
But I think the other piece of that is that sometimes we have to forgive ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a couple epic moments in my journey as a mom where it was a total mom fail. I totally overreacted, said words I never would want to say, I'd never want spoken to me. And I asked them for their forgiveness, but man, it's still buried in there. And I realized
Mm-hmm.
I had to come to a place where I could forgive myself as well.
Yes.
Sometimes that's harder. Not always, but sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
Friends, we're going to go to a real quick commercial break. But when we come back, I want to talk to Tricia about how can we help others when we see them complaining, and what is her hope-filled perspective if you find yourself living amidst grumbling, complaining, and negativity. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. Today we're talking about a real important topic about living a grumble-free life. Other words for that are complaining, whining, just general negativity. This is so crucial. I hear so many people, they say they want to live a more peaceful life. And I think one of the keys to that is letting go of the grumbling, complaining, and negativity. Would you agree, Tricia?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not only peaceful outwardly, it's peaceful inwardly, which, really impacts us.
One of my goals with this program is to not only help the listener who's going through a hard time, but also to equip listeners to help others who are going through a hard time. Can you give us an example of something we might do or say to help someone who's struggling with a life of negatively grumbling, complaining?
Yeah. Usually it's easier with our kids because they will sit down and listen to us. And I think sometimes really just having, when you're having a conversation with us and they're grumbling and complaining, helping them to see, like, I will pray with you about that. But also, we know, like, God is doing things and pointing out the positive things that God is maybe doing in their life. And I think it's so easy for people just to latch on to the negative things that we can point them to the positive things that is happening. Like, yeah, your child is doing this, but remember last year when you were talking about this, that that is such an improvement, and just helping them to turn their thoughts. And I think we could have that. It depends on the depth of relationship with the person.
Yes.
You could help change their thoughts. But if it's something that you really like, I have family members that have really struggled with this, and I've just had to be more honest and say, you know what, you are really focusing on maybe your husband, the negative things that are going on. Maybe just thank him. It might be, for something that he's doing, and I'll share a story or something. And so it depends on the depth of relationship. You can really point people to looking for those good things and thanking other people, and that encourages them and points them in the right direction.
I love that. If a listener themselves is resonating with today's message and they're struggling with looking through life from a negative or a grumble focused lens, what hope-filled perspective would you want to offer them that you've seen come out of your own journey?
Yeah, really, I think the times that I really sit and think about what is really bothering me kind of gets to the heart of the matter. So I may be having a difficult time with one of my kids, and because we brought in multiple kids from multiple backgrounds with multiple personalities. Some kids I was able to connect with better. Some kids had a harder time connecting with, and so I would be more grumbling about them and their personality, and that child's so loud, and you know whatever issue it is, and really sitting before God. And I would say, what is the deeper issue with this? What is really going on in my heart? And that really helps us when we're looking at God's perspective on things. It gives us a whole new insight. So maybe I do have a child that acts out more, that is disrespectful to me, that we don't have the bond, and I pray about it. God might say, you know what? She's been hurt by a lot of people and she's putting up walls. So keep pushing in and keep trying to draw close to her, even though you want to grumble about it. And so, I forgot to turn off my alarm. So really just looking at God's perspective on things makes a huge difference.
I'm curious, because you did this experiment with a group of people, you've got a small community living right there. Were there any general themes that you recognized as being at the root? Shame or
Mm-hmm.
not feeling appreciated? For me, I think that's where my grumbling comes from, is when I don't feel appreciated. Then I get irritable and start grumbling. Are there any general themes that you saw come out being at the root that would help us identify, where's my grumbling coming from?
Yeah, with some kids, shame is definitely one thing. And talking with therapists, we can either look at ourselves where we do something wrong, we can apologize, and we said, I did that wrong, I'm forgiven, or we can take that, I'm a bad person, I don't do anything right. And so even though we have a group of people, I think that shame based for some people is definitely more prevalent, just because of their past experience. They internalize everything. And so just going to that person, that kid, you're not a bad person. I make mistakes, and I'll even say, I did this, I did this, I did that. Am I a bad person? No. See, but all of us make mistakes, and getting them to understand that shame. And I think one thing that we, as a group of people, because there's so many personalities, when we see grace extended to, like, from parent to child, I've also seen them move from child to child or teen to child with each other. And so that has been a cool thing to say. And I'll hear those same words, you're not a bad person. Even though you did that to me, I love you. And so whatever words we use with, like, a parent to child, that will ripple with the other kids. And so that's been really neat to see. And even my grandma lives with me, and just seeing her, she's had a heart during this, she broke her back. And so she was dealing with that. And just to see her praising God, they would say, look at that. Grandma's not complaining. She's in there praying and praising. So those examples, we always talk about, kids learn by seeing, not just by our words. And when they see those examples of someone struggling and still praising God, someone forgiving, someone saying, you're not a bad person, even though you did that wrong, God loves you, I love you, all those things are a ripple effect among the whole group, even though it may be on an individual basis.
I always like to end the program giving our listener a practical tip that they can do today. What suggestion do you have that someone could begin to implement to make change in their own life starting today?
Yeah, and I think going back to when you feel that grumbling coming, it's almost like it's on the tip of your tongue, and you see it ready to come out. I do this multiple times a day, closing my lips, like physically, like, I'm going to close my lips right now. And then thinking of, either if I'm by myself, I don't need to speak it out loud, but in my mind, thank you, God, for this, or thank you for that, or looking around and saying, like, if I feel like grumbling about what's going on in homeschool, or I'll say, thank you that all of you, came and sat down with a good attitude this morning, or something, trying to turn it around and finding whether it's just between me and God and, something I want to grumble about, or me with another person, or me with the group, just pausing, physically clenching my lips, and then thinking of a praise to speak instead.
That reminds me of Philippians 4:8, where God tells us whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, think on these things and then speak them out. Friends, I want to close out this episode with Philippians 2:14. This is a good charge for all of us because it says, do all things without grumbling or disputing. That's a challenge for me, and I hope that you find it a challenge for you in the coming days. Tricia, thank you for coming on and sharing your story and the success of this grumble-free year challenge, because now you're challenging the rest of us to be mindful of our thoughts and our words.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really love being here.
Friends, this has been another episode of your Hope-Filled Perspective. I hope that there was some nugget in today's program that encouraged you, blessed you, and yes, even challenged you. Until next week, make it a hope-filled week.